All right, we do have a quorum in this meeting present, so you can get started whenever you're ready, Tom.
Okay, great. Thanks everyone for attending the meeting this morning. I'll read the notice of non-discrimination first. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status or background. The guidelines, all participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. After roll call, board members may mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by either clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom of the screen, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Erin McGuire via the chat box at emcguire@ctps.org or by telephone 857-702-3681. In the accessibility statement, this meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Erin McGuire at mpostaff@emcguire@ctps.org or by telephone 857-702-3681. And with that, Erin, do you want to call on for introductions?
Yes, absolutely. Inner Core Committee?
Tom Bent here.
MBTA Advisory Board?
Brian Kane here.
Metro West Regional Collaborative?
Dennis Giabetti here. Sorry.
MassDOT OTP?
Nope, Derek Cravat here.
MAPC?
Good morning, Eric Barassa.
The other MassDOT seat?
John Romano here, MassDOT Highway.
RTAC?
Leonard Diggins, Advisory Council here.
City of Boston?
City of Boston here.
And the Town of Brookline.
So Rob King has left the Town of Brookline's employment.
Yes,
I'm
Michael
not sure.
Sandman is here today for Brookline. I'm not sure if he's able to unmute. He'll be joining this committee.
Fantastic. Mike's a select board
member. But if not, that calls the roll.
Okay, thank you. Today's agenda, I'll just run through it and then we'll pick up on the, well, actually, I'm sorry, I skipped one. Public comments. If there's anyone that has public comments, you can please comment now or wait until you actually have a comment, raise your hand, and we will get to you as soon as we can. And with that, I guess we go to item 3, action items.
Tom, there is a hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, didn't see it.
It's by Jim Lee.
Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for your consideration here. Jim Nee with the Metro West Regional Transit Authority. I know you've probably all heard me speak on this topic before, so I'll keep it nice and short. The Metro West RTA appreciates any and all consideration as this process is ongoing, as you consider the resolution for RTA representation on the MPO board. We just appreciate any and all consideration. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Tegan.
Thanks, Tom. So I will go through just the agenda real fast.
But I just wanted to preview, as you all know, I'm Tegan Tyke. I'm the executive director at the staff of the MPO. And during this meeting, you're actually going to hear primarily from other staff, from Aaron McGuire, from Abby Katrumbis, and from David Hong. But I wanted to set a little bit of context while we're looking at the agenda here today. So most of you participating in this committee have already been through a few meetings on this topic in the prior format of this committee, but this is the first meeting of this committee that's been formally established through roughly a 9-month period to recommend specific updates to the MOU. So even though you've already met 3 times, many of you, and worked to produce a memo, we've heard from you, as well as the board as a whole, that you would like to sort of inform your recommendations and decisions on this, on what we can kind of bring in as best practices or even just practices of other MPOs. So as you heard at the annual meeting, I hope, from the executive director of AMPO, the National Association for MPOs, the MPOs vary a lot across the country. And so we wanted to bring some of that information to bear as kind of like a high level step back before we get into specific recommendations from you all in future meetings, because we think that there can be quite a bit learned just by looking at the range of practices. So just because we're bringing ranges of practices here to you for your just consideration discussion today does not necessarily mean that we are recommending that you move in a certain direction, but we're bringing them to the table so that you have kind of a helpful grounding as you get into this next stage of actually working towards making recommendations. So with that context setting, I'm just going to say that in terms of the agenda, first, Aaron is going to remind ourselves of the actual federal regulations around what is required for an MOU and what is left open to interpretation. This is a pretty brief topic, but again, I think important to make sure we're grounding ourselves at the beginning of this stage of the conversation. And then second, as I mentioned, we spent some time doing some additional research, or some deeper research into a number of other MPOs and how they approach their MOUs. And we roughly looked at peer MPOs, but we also gathered what information we could from those, what we consider peers. Included in that are some topics that aren't necessarily in the memo for consideration for updates. Like we'll talk a bit more about the governance of the boards, but I think that that's still helpful context to understand how the governance varies and therefore how other practices may or may not be related to what that governance structure looks like. So just bringing more information and context to the table. And then again, explore kind of the ranges of approaches associated with those different structures. So there is not a lot that is usual because it does vary a lot. So looking forward to that conversation with you. So that's the peer MOU analysis. And then we will talk about, again, the topics in the work plan again. So that's just to sort of gaining additional input in this next stage of work and consensus around the more detailed work plan of this committee. So we'll be able to lay that out for you in a way that is based on the topics in the memo, and that's a good guiding framework. And then you can discuss what you all as a committee want to do in terms of sticking to that framework, and or if you would like to consider varying from that framework. And then another topic on the agenda will be, we would like to engage you in a discussion about a recommended strategy for engaging the region as a whole in the process. So we'll bring a recommendation forward for you to consider and potentially modify, but we wanted you to have a proposal to sort of react to for that engagement strategy agenda item. And then we'll close out with the normal member items and the next meeting. But I just want to emphasize that we'll stop after each bullet point here on the agenda for conversation and to work with you to sort of figure out the direction you want to go in. I will say also that even though we're not talking about very specific recommendations today, we as staff have already been working on kind of the lower hanging fruit, which are the staff-led updates to the text of the MOU. So we've been making progress in that area. We'll also be reaching out to the RTAs to follow up on that particular item as well. And we'll sort of be able to follow up on those items at the next committee meeting as well. So that I can turn it back to you, Tom, if you have any questions, if anyone else, or we can just dive into the agenda items.
Thank you, Tegan. Does anybody have any questions with the agenda?
70 minutes, Tom? We're going to do this in 70 minutes, huh? Go for it.
We'll see.
I have more time, but so, okay, cool.
Depends how many questions you ask, Len.
Yeah, good point, Tom. All right, I'll shut up now. Yeah.
So if there's no other questions, we'll go to item 3, which is an action item, August 24th, 2023, ad hoc MOU committee meeting minutes. And we're looking for a vote to approve those minutes.
Hey, Tom, Eric Barassa here. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, thank you. Jen,
I'll second that motion.
all in favor? Well, do you have to call roll call on that, Erin?
We do have to do roll call.
Okay.
So Tom Bent,
Yes.
Brian Kane,
Yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Derek Cravat,
Yes, Derek Cravat, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Len Diggins,
Dickens, yes.
Jen Rowe,
Jen Rowe, yes.
and Mike Sandman, who is out of the room at the moment. Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jen. We're gonna go to number 4, which is federal regulations. Erin's gonna do a review of the federal regulations related to the Metropolitan Transportation Planning process found in the Code of Federal Regulations. It's all yours, Erin.
Thank you. So I'm going to review, as Tom said, the federal regulations related to MPOs and MOUs. So we're looking at the 23 CFR 450 subpart C, specifically 310 and 314. These cover MPO governance and the MOU specifically. So key takeaways from MPO governance are that the structure of an MPO board for a TMA shall consist of local elected officials, state officials, and officials from public agencies or operators of modes of transportation, which includes public transportation providers. The second part of this is looking at MOUs. And here it is required that the MOU outlines an agreement between the MPO, the state, and providers of public transportation to cooperatively determine the responsibilities in carrying out the transportation planning process, which are then outlined in the MPO. The regulations also state that this agreement should be periodically reviewed and should contain information about the development of the long-range transportation plan, the TIP, and the annual list of obligated projects. So all that to be said, there are limited regulations surrounding our specific update of the MOU, and we do have a bit of flexibility with these updates that we're doing.
Okay, great. Thank you, Erin. Does anyone have any questions so far on that? Eric.
Do the regulations get at how how a decision is made? Is it is there an actual person, is the governor sort of the ultimate decider, or what is it what do the regulations say about how the an MPO is sort of constituted and the MOU is approved, et cetera?
So large changes do have to go through the governor specifically. It outlines that minor changes, such as changing 1 or 2 members of the MPO board, don't need to go through the governor. So I think that in terms of the scope that we have outlined for this committee, we are the main decision-making body, us and the MPO board.
Okay.
Brian.
So, Aaron, I want to respectfully push back a little bit on that. So, as far as I can tell, we are amending a document that's been amended 1 million times, and we're at the point where we don't even have the original anymore. So, I just don't buy the fact that we can call this a minor change. I'm pretty sure we have to kind of start at 0. And I guess my question then becomes, if we need the governor's approval, what does that mean? Does that mean the Secretary of Transportation? Does that mean someone the Secretary delegates authority to? Or does it mean we need the governor's signature? And if so, how do we do that? And so I guess I would like the committee to discuss, Tom, what we're actually doing here. And if we are all comfortable amending a document that's been amended 15 times since 1970, whatever, the before some of us were born. That and I got some gray hair here, so that's going back a ways. That may or may not adequately serve the needs of this region now. Thanks.
Aaron, do you have any response to that?
No, I
Or
will
is it-
defer to the committee for that one.
All right, so Brian, it looks like we'll have to get a little more information on that to see exactly how this would need to be done, and how the committee members feel about it. Len,
Well, I mean,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no problem. I mean, so the number of times it's been amended to me is not a not a big deal. I mean, things get amended a lot. I mean, actually looking at the code here, it seems like, I mean, there's lots of places where likely things have been amended. In fact, I was going to ask if there was a hyperlink version of the regulations that you sent, because I mean, there are lots of references to other parts of the code that I think would be helpful to know. I mean, but we do have a working document here. I do find it curious, that you say the original isn't there. I mean, I'd be curious, in a minor way, with tiny m, to see the original. But we're working off of this MOU. I mean, I think it's up to us to determine the extent to which it needs to be amended. I mean, that's the point of this exercise. I mean, and so I mean, a body 10 years from now, we're going, well, it's been amended a million times plus one. I mean, and that last group that did some amendments, they did a really good job. So thank you.
And thanks, Len. Jen.
I just had a question. As I was reading the second part, the 314 section, I was curious. I was around for some of the conversation around Obama and Anthony Fox's proposed change to MPOs and the planning areas and whatnot. And I guess as I was reading this, I was curious, is that Metropolitan Planning Agreement section, did that come out of that era? And I wasn't sure the connection between the MOU and this Metropolitan Planning Agreement, and was curious if someone in staff could speak to that piece.
Any staff member can speak to that?
I think that's a really good question, and something that we can look into a little bit more. Just not saying that Aaron, who took the most recent look at these regulations, is jumping to answer the question. I think that's a very worthwhile question that we should look into a bit more.
And tagging Brian's question about who's the final decision maker on this, and do you see it being an issue that we're amending this MOU as we have in the past, as per what Brian was getting at?
I think this deserves a little bit more exploration and discussion as well, just because I know that a couple of amendments ago, there was a significant adjustment of adding quite a few members to the board. And I'm assuming that that there wasn't a governor's signature at that time, but you could consider that probably at least borderline in terms of if you're adding, I don't know, another 30% or 40% to the membership. I don't know what the exact number was, but that was a pretty significant amendment in and of itself. And maybe this is a more minor amendment on top of that potentially. But I think the question is valid, is at what point do you sort of make a call and say that it's evolved so much from the original intent that it deserves some level of kind of high level, authoritative, decision making around, is this still the agreement, at the higher level than board members making these more minor edits. But I don't know what the answer to that is. And I think that is largely probably more up to the board and maybe perhaps conversations with our federal partners. So I don't have an individual opinion on that, but I think the point is valid to sort of maybe continue that conversation with the right people and try to figure out what's appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Or any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, let's go to agenda item 5, review of the MPO MOUs. And that will be Abigail.
Hi, so for those who I haven't met yet virtually or otherwise, I'm Abby. I'm the new transportation policy analyst, new-ish. I've been here for about 3 months now. And I'm just going to be reviewing the MOUs that we were able to find publicly online. David, if you could go to the next slide, or whoever's running the PowerPoint. So the themes for the peer MOU analysis, we want to look at 5 specific issue areas: MPO governance structure, relationship with RTAs, the advisory councils across MPOs, agency collaboration, so how the MOUs sort of address how the MPO will work with DOT, will work with other agencies, and board education and training. And next slide. So in terms of the approach, limitations, and constraints, to begin this research, we looked at a report that the MPO had previously commissioned back in 2020 to compare how our MPO compares to other peer MPOs nationwide on a whole bunch of metrics, not just MOUs. At the time, they had used a fairly extensive selection process that was based largely on population size to decide who our peer MPOs were. So we used their same criteria and looked at who they had selected for peer MPOs and began our search there. Of the 10 selected MPOs in that report, we were able to find 7 MOUs that were publicly available. These were Seattle, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., New York City, Miami-Dade, San Francisco, and Denver. We also then included Houston Galveston's MPO's MOU because Houston has a similar population to Chicago, which was one of the previously selected MPOs that we couldn't find a usable MOU for. To supplement this, we also looked at other publicly available resources to ascertain things like board membership, advisory council structure, and other questions of interest that weren't covered in the MOUs. So all told, we included 8 MOUs for analysis. Because of this small sample size, would love to stress yet again that these findings are not intended to be comprehensive, are not intended to be recommendations, or fully inclusive of the wide range of MOU structure. Next slide. So in terms of a high-level summary of findings, overall, the most significant finding is that MOUs are highly variable. Sort of as Erin was saying, there's not a ton of very specific guidance on what needs or doesn't need to be in these documents. So this variation is really the rule, not the exception. As we already saw, there are very few regulations surrounding MOUs at the federal level. And so as such, it appears that MPOs across the country have really framed theirs in pretty dramatically different ways. There are a couple overarching trends, however. One, that although the size of MPO boards are, let me just make sure, yes, are highly variable, most of them have similar configurations. All the MPOs that we looked at, so the 8 MOUs, had at least one elected chair and one elected vice chair. New York City has a much more similar board structure to ours in that the NYDOT commissioner is a designated co-chair of the board with the other chair being elected. The second finding was that 2 regional transit authorities outside of the region's anchor city transit agency, so sort of the analog to the MBTA, are not well represented on boards or committees. Not all of them even had the anchor city transit agency on the board, but so we were unable to find good examples of RTA inclusion in the decision-making process in the way that we are hoping to / have been instructed to in our certification. And lastly, what was perhaps most revealing about this research is that there's really like a scarcity, a paucity of information in many MOUs. Rather than operational documents, many of them read more as relatively bare-bone understandings that agencies will work together in some capacity. So it's plausible that there are more detailed rules and regulations in operation manuals or bylaws. And so because of this, we are hoping to reach out to staff at some of these MPOs for more in-depth discussions. Next slide. So for MPO governance and agency collaboration, as previously mentioned, the MPO board size is not consistent at all across these 8 that we looked at. Some had as few as 9 voting members, and some had as many as 37 voting members. So just truly a massive amount of variation. As we already sort of discussed, the New York City's MPO does have the commissioner of NYDOT as the designated co-chair. The other co-chairs elected. Elsewise, we found that all chairs were elected. None in these 8 were rotating. They were all elected, and vice chairs as well. In terms of agency collaboration, there are mostly oblique references to agency collaboration. things like the MPO will collaborate with the Department of Transportation, or DOT will provide timely updates to the MPO. Again, these aren't super helpful or instructive sort of phrasings to let us know how things actually operate on a sort of a more granular level. So we are hoping to discuss actual collaborative processes with staff from other MPOs. Next slide. So in terms of relationships with RTAs, we haven't yet, sort of as we already discussed, we haven't yet found any MPOs that incorporate RTAs into the decision-making in the way that we are hoping to and were advised to in our most recent certification. In the 8 MPOs that we looked at, again, none had RTA representation outside of the largest operator in the area. Seattle does have 5 seats for local transit representatives, as they call them, but there are no requirements for those to be transit operators, and at the moment, none of them are. However, several of the MOUs/MPOs had standing sub-region committees that inspire closer collaboration with regional transit authorities. In New York City in particular, they had RTAs on these smaller standing sub-region committees, although they didn't have them on the sort of the overarching board. Next slide. In terms of advisory councils across MPOs, nearly every MPO in the sample had an advisory organization mentioned in their MOU, although the structure and composition of the advisory organization wasn't necessarily detailed in the MOU document, but luckily, most of them are publicly available just sort of on their public website. So we were able to sort of ascertain the structure from there, which also vary widely. And so the structure and composition really had a wide range as well. For example, in New York City, there are 7 advisory council members, all of whom are state or federal officials. In Denver, the advisory committee is made up of almost 40 individuals who either represent an industry, a county, or a subregion, an elected office, really just a lot of stakeholders. So again, just a massive amount of variation, a massive amount of leeway in terms of how these are structured, how they work together, things like that. And selection for the advisory council or committee, so how the composition and who actually serves on these was decided, was either application-based, appointment-based. So for example, one person needs to be from this county, one person needs to be a representative of this industry, or a combination of both. So it's not super clear from the public documents how the roles of these councils or committees differ or why there is so much variation. But it just goes on to show, again, that there's no right or correct way to engage and collaborate with advisory organizations. And last slide. I think it's the last one. So lastly, for board member education, we have been unable to identify any formalized board member education in the MOU documents. However, we do know that anecdotally, some MPOs invest significant amounts of resources in professional development, such as sponsoring peer exchanges or paying for attendance at conferences. So conversations with other MPO staff can help us more clearly understand how these are paid for, how they're coordinated, who does what, that sort of thing. And again, the MOU may or may not be where this type of agreement or these types of conversations live. And I know that was kind of a lot of information, so I will pause there for questions, comments, concerns. Yeah, so those were the 5 topics that we looked at, and I will pause here for questions or comments.
Okay, does anyone have any questions or comments? Jen Rowe.
I was just curious if staff had already thought about it. Maybe this is something we can discuss as a committee, but were you kind of, it sounds like you're already planning to kind of do the second level of digging into this, given kind of how hard it was to find certain types of information just from the MOUs themselves.
Yes, definitely. So that's sort of what we're hoping to have conversations in the coming like weeks and months with hopefully the 8 of the MPOs that we already mentioned, but also perhaps any others, really just sort of casting a wide net to figure out what other folks are doing.
Brian Kane.
Thanks, Tom. Abby, welcome, first of all. Glad you're here. In your research, did you come across many or any other MPOs that were in the business of sort of standard setting or goal setting, or kind of something that's been trying, where they try to drive all their regional actors towards a common goal or a common outcome or objective, something like that?
So not yet. Again, I think that's something that like I wasn't necessarily looking at for this like short presentation, but I do know that like San Francisco's MPO, for example, has a massive amount of like control. They operate the tolls, they operate a lot of different services. So I know that they have a lot of power in standard setting, in goal setting in the region. But outside of that, I'm not yet aware. If anybody else knows of any on staff, then please jump in here. But as of yet, to be determined.
Tegan.
Yeah, I can add sort of anecdotally speaking, just from attending, AMPO conferences where I'm interacting with a bunch of MPOs across the country and hearing some of their presentations and talking with AMPO. I think that there are examples where MPOs are more sort of driven in that direction, Brian. And I think it'd be interesting, although potentially very unbounded, to say that we would want to like dive into, that topic of an MPO that functions more that way. It'd be interesting to figure out if that's of interest. What are we trying to figure out? What are we trying to understand from doing that? Like, for example, I've heard a lot of anecdotal stuff around what's the MPO around Seattle, that the way that it's structured, the way that it engages like agency and elected officials, and the way that, frankly, their laws and regulations are set up allow them to pursue different like financing initiatives and set the direction towards how they want, things like transit in the region or otherwise to evolve. So I know it exists. I don't think I feel comfortable saying that that's the norm, that an MPO operates that way, just due to the complexity of the relationships between all the different agencies. But there are a few, at least, that I've heard talked about and stood up a bit as really driving the direction of the region, I think, in the context that you're suggesting. That's not a complete answer, but I guess I'd be interested in hearing more about, if this group is interested in exploring that more, what we're trying to deduce from understanding like what it is that those MPOs may look like.
Len.
Thank you, Tom. So I was one quick question, may have a longest answer, is how did SF get so much power, for lack of a better word? And the other is something that you touched on, Abigail, and I think you realize that potentially some of the answers about what other MPOs have for MOUs will be found in their operations plan, because in our earlier meetings, we discussed how we have to be careful of putting things in MPO that are already in our operations plan. And so that's it. Thank you.
And Brian.
Oh, sorry, I didn't lower the hand before. Yeah, I guess just for the fellow committee members, I guess one suggestion for a direction for us to consider is just that, do we want to set a technical standard, for instance, for traffic signals so that they are all transit signal priority enabled by eventually? Or do we want to set a certain standard for safety that comes with the money that we grant, in terms of requiring municipalities to set a certain standard of safety, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's lots that we can do. And I guess in asking this question, I'm not suggesting that staff go down a rabbit hole of trying to find all of the technicalities everywhere of every individual state. I mean, we have 50 states, and in this state, we have 351 sovereign communities. I get that there are differences and we don't have counties, et cetera, et cetera. I guess I'm just suggesting that there is probably a mechanism that we have and we could use that will draw the region closer together in its transportation network and its transportation system. Because as we all know, individuals don't really care about municipal borders as they traverse across the region. They just want to get where they're going. And we've all seen where lanes end or things are better or worse, bus lanes end once you hit a municipal border. And I just think there's a way to do this. And this might be an opportunity to do that. So I'll get off my high horse now. Thank you.
Go ahead, Len.
I just wanted to see if Abigail had a quick answer to my first question about SF, San Francisco format or structure. Thanks.
The short answer is no. The long
that's
answer
fine.
is I'm sure it's sort of developed over decades and yeah.
Short answer is good. That's fine. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Just getting back to what Brian was saying. Now, would some of what he is suggesting has MassDOT already done? Like setting speed limits or timing on lights and things like that. And then so would we be superseding what MassDOT already has there as their regulations? And then also, does some of this end up in or is it in the? I don't think it's in the current operations plan, now. So, I'm just concerned where, would the MOU really get into the weeds on that type of detail?
Can I respond to that, Tom?
Sure. Yeah, actually, go ahead, Len, and then John Romano.
Okay. Okay. So I'm thinking that the way we can maybe update this MOU is that we represent it to everyone who's interested. I'm thinking like the subregions, and get their sense of what they find is inadequate or what they would like to see better in it. We come back, we work it, and we go back to them, and so that way it kind of pops out, maybe what we do, and then we do this ourselves too. We also do it with our colleagues on the board, and if we want to go down the vision and the standardization pathway, we go there, but we go there with the mandate, of our colleagues, and the other participants, members of the region. That's it. Thank you.
John Romano.
Thanks, Tom. So I just think that before we try to reinvent the wheel on things like speed limits and traffic signals, et cetera, I mean, Mass DOT's state traffic engineer's office spends a lot of time making, setting policies, parameters, et cetera, and does a lot of research before they do that. So if we do want to consider going that way, I think we should bring them in first and see where they are instead of trying to recreate or reinvent something that's people have spent a lot of time already working on.
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm not suggesting we reinvent the wheel. I am simply saying that we have the worst congestion in the United States, and there's things that we can do to draw the region closer together. And when I mentioned traffic signals, I'm not saying we reinvent all of them, but I do think we can say that if we are going to fund a project that involves buying a municipality new traffic signals, it has to have things like allowing transit signal prioritization. And that's just a cost of doing business. There's lots of things like that we can do. And frankly, letting the traffic engineers kind of set transportation policy hasn't worked in the last 50 years in the United States. I think we should try something different here in Mousen. But again, I'm now getting off my high horse forever. I promise.
All right, I'm gonna let John respond, and then Derek.
First of all, Brian, it'd be no fun if you got off your high horse forever. So, maybe enough for today, but not forever. I don't disagree with what you're saying, Brian. We should make sure that maybe we're not different requirements. We're a project that we all know, right? Today it might be funded out of the highway, one of the highway buckets, and tomorrow it gets moved to the MPO and vice versa, depending on funding. And we shouldn't have different standards because then nobody would be able, how would anybody be able to design a project? If we move it, say now you have to go back to zero and do X, Y, Z because you don't meet our requirements versus you know, the highway department that you've been working with for the last 10 years on, right? Just a thought.
Thank you, John. Derek?
Thank you. Tegan, I don't know if you had anything on that topic or if you want to, if it's something new.
But mine is more like kind of business as record as keeping after. Please go ahead and comment, and then I'm
Okay.
just gonna note a couple
All right.
things.
Great. Yeah, I was just gonna say that, you know, I think those are, you know, I think going in the direction, you know, everyone wants to go in, right? But I was just gonna offer that some other forums are the transportation evaluation criteria, right? There's room for that, for sort of like signaling to municipalities what the priorities of the MPO are within that. So just like, you know, maybe it's not as like black and white as we will fund a project or not fund a project if it includes these elements, but it's at least, you know, somewhere for those kinds of considerations to live, just to throw that out there. And then, I mean, like, you know, there was a policy that was passed to not fund projects that were not at 25% design, right? So that could be another kind of, if there are topics like that that folks are interested in, and perhaps through the TIP committee that's been recently formed, those are good discussions too. But I just wanted to throw that out there, just, you know, things, Brian, just like that made me think of your comment that, you know, just throw it out there for consideration. So thank you.
Thanks, Derek. Tegan?
Thanks. So sort of a little bit of admin around this. One, I wanted to say, you know, thank you to the committee members for participating in the discussion. That what we had heard from you all and why we wanted to present this range of peer experience, because, you know, we've heard from you all that you don't want to make decisions in the vacuum of one context, which is the one that we operate in. And so while this introduces a lot of complex potential rabbit holes, you know, which I know we respectfully do not want to go down many or all of those rabbit holes, I think this is really good for ground setting. And in terms of some business keeping, I do want to say that, you know, Michael Salmon couldn't get his audio working. And so he is putting he's put a comment in the meeting chat, and I just want to say it out loud to be part of the meeting. And he just wrote in the chat that he agrees with Brian Kane's point that I think he was making around just, I think in general, the last point around working to sort of like think about the MPO supporting some of those setting standards in some way. So I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I just want to acknowledge that comment, I agree with Brian Kane's point, came through. And then also, Len brought up, you know, a topic around an idea around kind of engagement with the region as a whole. And I think it's just important to recognize that, and we can talk about it when we actually do talk about engagement, and you can revisit that, and then you all can discuss the direction, because that could influence the engagement strategy for this committee. Thank you.
Right. Jen Rowe.
So on a slight shift, I wanted to follow up on one point that was made about the RTA representation, and that it seems like our peers haven't incorporated the non-primary RTA in the way that we've been instructed to. I was curious if those other peers have also been instructed to in the same way we have, and are like therefore in process, or if this was sort of a unique thing that we've been are being asked to do.
Yeah, so
go ahead, Abigail.
I was just gonna say, I can't speak like to the historical narrative of it. Maybe Tegan can, but in publicly available documents, not yet. But again, like that's sort of why we want to talk to other MPO staff, because it's quite possible that we're not the only ones, and we don't want to like operate from a place of darkness of thinking we've been singled out for some reason.
Thank you. Yeah, and when I had a conversation with staff last week, you know, I brought that up also because I thought it was interesting that it looked like, you know, out of the ones that we took a quick look at, we didn't see that participation. And, you know, I was wondering why the feds were, you know, asking us to do that. So I thought that was interesting. I think at one point, I think somebody might have mentioned that, you know, maybe they're looking to us to set the standard here, you know, not sure with our MOU and with what we're, you know, and how we're including the different participants across the region. Does anyone have any other questions or thoughts at this time? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to item number 6, MOU update topics and work plan. David Hung.
Thank you, Tom. Item number 6. Current MOU update topics based on kind of the memo from the ad hoc committee as a reference point. If we could go to the following slide, please, Aaron. The one after that, and will walk us through the 6 that is currently on the docket. So first, staff-led content updates, including items such as adding clarity to voting rules, updating the paragraph about geographic and demographic equity and selecting projects to better reflect the goals of the MPO, and balancing content between MOU documents and the operations plan. These, as Tegan mentioned, are ongoing. They can be shared as early as Feb or late this month with the committee for review, and that will be sent offline and allow for at least a week for review. We can pick that up the following committee meeting as well for discussion. The second, this cluster of work focuses on building the important role that the advisory council has now in representing voices of interest, but also incorporating the work being done to chart the vision for the future of the council, and then articulating that in the MOU once these have been agreed by the council members. Number 3, the fiduciary agreement and its appendices are undergoing updates in Q1 and Q2, and references to this will also be placed into the MOU. Number 4, then there is a sizable body of work. We'll be working through this committee with the two RTAs on establishing the role they will potentially play on the board, aligned with the requirements set forth in the 2022 Federal Certification Review. CTPS staff are able to resume dialogue with the RTAs in late Jan if this committee agrees, and to resume this conversation and bring back a summary to the committee subsequently. So before I move on to, actually, let me go through the 5 and 6 as well, and then pause to see if that approach works with the committee members here. Number 5, in this work cluster, staff will work to document existing processes between relevant agencies, including but not limited to MARPA, the MBTA, MassDOT, and others, with regards to planning activities, including capital and financial planning. And 6, finally, the MOU will capture expectations and intent for training and education opportunities for the board. Moreover, through this exercise, we hope to develop some ideas and recommendations for training and peer exchange with this committee, and also gather your thoughts on that topic as well. So before I move on to a more timeline-based view, want to ask if the committee would be comfortable in item work cluster 4 for staff to initiate information gathering with the RTAs as a precursor to meeting with the committee itself.
Okay, I think I'll start on that. I know when we were having the ad hoc committee, that was I think a decision that the ad hoc committee had made to, to start reaching out to the RTAs to see, what they felt their roles would be. And I'm going to now ask Brian Kane. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I'm just gonna say, given that the feds have sort of told us we have to do this, and I don't think there's much disagreement, maybe we could just take that as a given that CADA and Metro West will be joining and not spend a ton of time on this. That's my suggestion.
I think one of the topics, though, was we were trying to understand what the what their roles would be, and I think to kind of clarify, get that from them as to what they they feel like, what their contribution would be to the board. And because I know we tried to do, we looked at this a few years ago and, the board voted against it. And so I think, there was some concern at the time as to, what would the level of involvement be? And it would we be based mainly on, the RTA items that concern them, or would it be more of a regional type of discussion with them? I don't know, but I do know we went through this before, and we kind of, to be honest with you, kind of kicked the can down the road until the feds brought it back up again. John Romano.
Sorry, Tom. So the other part of it was, we said we were gonna discuss whether or not both would be on or just one, like on an alternating basis or whatever. So
Right.
I don't, the other part, it would be interesting, Abigail, while you're, talking with the 8 MPOs, most, don't have RTAs represented, and it might be interesting to see why they don't. I know the feds have said we should do that. I don't know if it was a thou shalt, we'd like you to, right? But it would be interesting to hear why the other people are not doing it before we make any decisions.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you.
Len.
Thank you. And this may actually go to Eric or you. I asked this question and then I forget the answer. But why is it that I don't know if I was around the time that we voted not to have the RTAs on, or is that not a discussion for this time? Because I'm inclined to agree with Brian, who I kind of thought was on a high horse on that last comment, but maybe that's just me, that we should just go ahead, and get the RTAs on. The feds have said it, and either one or both, so, Eric or Tom?
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Well, what I was gonna just say is I agree that we should just, we should put that on an agenda, have that discussion, and let's try to make a decision and try to resolve the issue as part of this process, promptly. I don't know if that was the intent to do that right now, today, but I agree that should be on an agenda. And I'm also inclined to say, yes, let's figure out what's the appropriate way of having the RTAs be on the MPO, whether they're both just on it or there's one RTA seat. But let's actually let's just confront this issue head on. Let's have the conversation. Let's put it on the agenda. Let's deal with
it. Jen.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I guess I kind of, along with what Eric was saying, I think we should definitely have this conversation. We clearly need to figure out something to kind of satisfy this requirement. I will say, I do think the two pieces of information of understanding what would kind of satisfy what Metro West and kind of are looking for to be would be helpful, and then also the piece about understanding a little bit more about, are we the only ones doing this, and why others have or haven't. I will say, just to kind of name one reason we might not just want to have both of the RTAs on the board, is that really does change the kind of distribution of power regionally, in terms of kind of, if you think about the representation of core to non-core communities, as one example, it does change the dynamics, and it might probably is doing so in the opposite direction of kind of what would be a proportional representation of kind of residents, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And I have somebody, it says iPhone 2, and I'm not sure who that is. It's got their hand up.
I'm sorry, that's me, Tom Dennis. I thought I changed renamed it. Sorry. I had to get off a couple of times and come back on, so I probably didn't do it the last time. Anyways, I just wanted to reiterate what Eric said. I think Eric makes some good points. Let's get on the agenda, discuss it. I think the notion has always been is that there would be one RTA, not both RTAs. I think there's a desire for one, and I don't think there's a desire by the RTAs to have both. So it'd be just one of them would share that, would have that seat. But I think Eric hit it, that we should just get an agenda, discuss it, get some information. Let's hear from the RTAs, and let's make a decision. I think the feds several times have mentioned that their strong recommendation is to have the RTA represented on the MPO, and I think we should have that discussion.
Right, Eric, I saw your hand will go up and down. Did you have another comment?
I'm all set, thanks.
Okay. All right, any other comments? So it sounds like what we would like to do. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jen.
Sorry, thank you. Kind of one last comment or request is that in thinking through kind of the pieces that I would want to see to kind of have that conversation, I do think like I would find value in some sort of analysis of kind of representation on the board by population. I know it's a little bit messy given how we so that some of these seats are elected, but I think it would be helpful to understand kind of a like the planning, the areas that different subregions and other representatives are represent compared to population and potentially other factors. So I want to leave that open there.
Okay, Brian.
Just a question, Tom, is this the chance for us to suggest other topics to be considered by staff, or sort of what do you see the outcome of this sort of slide stroke topic being today?
Well, we wanted to, have this, basically the discussion that we're having now. So, and then actually, I know there's more information that Dave was going to go through that is related, I believe, to this also. But as far as on the roles of the RTAs, I'm fine with if we want to have a put this on the agenda and to have more discussion, which is what today was more of an overview of where we're going and how we're going to get there. But having information about getting back, like even on the RTA issue, do both of them want to be on the board? And if they don't, how would we go about deciding which one is going to be on it? Is 1 year, one the next, that type of thing. So, that's kind of like where we are right now, that, any discussions that we want to move forward on, we should do that, and we can set up agenda items on whatever we want to talk about.
Okay, well, then just to follow up, if I would suggest we include a topic about including something in the MOU around climate change and around mobility. Thank you.
Okay. All right, John Romano.
I think so. I think what Dave asked originally was, should we have staff start talking to the RTAs? From the ad hoc committee, the way we said we were going to approach this was to have both RTAs come and talk to us, as you said earlier. And I think that should be the next step, right? Maybe at our next meeting, to have them come and start talking with us. And I don't think it's a bad idea to have at least staff reach out to them and maybe do some preliminary, setting the stage for them coming to our next meeting and having this discussion, so that as other people have said, so we can move the point. But I think we need to do it after having the discussion with them.
John, I agree, because that is, thanks for the reminder. That was what came out of the ad hoc committee meeting. So if to move this one forward, if staff could get that set up, and like John suggested, tee up the RTA so that they understand, what they're coming in for, and that they can make their case as to why and how they would participate in the full MPO.
Absolutely, Roger that. Oh,
okay.
sorry.
Tegan, go ahead.
Yeah, like Dave said, absolutely, Roger, that. I think we'd ask the committee just to, if we hear back from one or both of the other TAs that the next meeting date is not a good time, if you can be flexible with us, we'll try to figure out the right meeting date for them. The other aspect of this is just to follow up on, some folks said they were interested in understanding where other MPOs were at, whether they were being asked to also include our TAs or, et cetera. And I think that's something we could try to start to gather information on, but given just the time frame in between meetings, I don't know that we'd get responses from other MPOs necessarily super quickly to have that full set of information. So if this committee would like us to, we can start down that path. But if we, if again, if the RTAs would come at the next meeting, I couldn't promise we would have comprehensive, results any stretch of that by then.
Tegan, a question, would IMPO be helpful with that?
Yes, definitely. And we can definitely follow up with them on this and other topics. But if we actually want to reach out to and talk to somebody at an MPO more specifically, that takes a little bit more time sometimes to follow up on.
Yeah, on the IMPO one, I was just wondering if the feds have, basically talked to a lot of MPOs saying, hey, we want you to do this. I would think that they would probably know that, so it'd be interesting to see what they have to say.
We can definitely follow up with them in the interim.
Okay, great. Any other questions on this? Jen Rowe?
Yeah, thank you. I just bouncing back to the kind of conversation around other potential topics. The two things that I've heard spoken about today that don't necessarily fit cleanly, but maybe somewhat in these 6 areas are, I think Brian's comments around kind of a broader role for the MPO in terms of setting an agenda for the region that could kind of fit in number 5, but might kind of require a little bit more of it focus if we choose as a group to want to pursue that. The other piece that I think has come up a number of times and seems to distinguish us quite from most other MPOs, although of course no standard for what an MPO is or how it's set up, but is the chairship question. And so I wonder if that's something we also ought to include or consider including as a update topic. Curious what others' thoughts are on that.
Yeah, on that, Jen, yeah, I'd be kind of interested to see on the chairs. I know we touched upon it a little bit in the ad hoc committee, but I don't think we came to any decision on that. Does anybody have any thoughts on what Jen just proposed or brought up? Brian?
Unsurprisingly, I agree with Jen and think that those topics should be considered. And I'll just reiterate what I said as well. We should put climate change on here and regional mobility.
All right, thank you. Let's add those topics and we'll be looking forward to some more information from staff on those.
I guess, can I just say something? With respect to climate change and mobility, isn't that more appropriate for how we select projects? And that's part of the criteria that we use for selecting projects. Do we use chair to Mr. Kane?
Sure. Brian?
Well, if we're going to use the MOU process as any type of goal or objective setting mechanism, then I think it belongs here. And then it flows down to criteria setting. But
yeah, but we have all the other criteria, safety, and so I know these are important, but we have these other criteria that are also important. So then why not the whole basket?
No reason why we can't.
Okay, that's it. Just trying to understand the distinction. Thank you.
Mike Sandman.
Oh, thanks. I'm sort of been deposited in the middle of this, so I'm trying to get up to speed here. But I must say that I don't see how climate change cannot be a topic that needs to be considered in determining and identifying projects or qualifying projects or whatever really the MPO is doing. So I would support what Brian has said.
All right, so let's add that to the list. Let's see, moving, I don't see anything else there. David, you want to continue? Dave?
Yes, thank you. I'll move through this one fairly swiftly. This is the high level visual representation of the next 9 to 10 months of work ahead for the MOU update committee. It's the same board clusters as the one shown previously, also taking into consideration the comments just received around climate change and regional mobility. As you can see, the 2 of the 6 are already underway by MPO staff. The staff-led MOU document updates in the fiduciary agreement, then the largest body of work, and one that will initiate promptly is the RTA role cluster. Here, or rather, all of the work streams have a bit of parallel and staggered timelines since there's no strong dependencies between the work clusters. The timelines, I want to note, are of course subject to change, but the targeted end is October in order to open for public comments before finalizing thereafter. I'd also like to give you a more granular view on January and February on this next slide. And then also subsequently provide a rolling update as we move along the roadmap that was on the previous slide. So in gray, we have the committee meetings, and then in blue, we have the MPO board. So here we have the next 3 committee meetings as well as the next 3 board meetings highlighted. I've just walked us through the 6 MOU topics, the work plan, and we'll review the engagement strategy shortly. Having said that, on January the 18th, we can share with the board, or rather, Tom, if you're comfortable in the committee chair reports, time allocated, you share with the board that the MOU work is underway, that staff will reach out to the RTAs to prime conversations with this committee, and if right, and move forward from there, and also get a time and agenda onto subsequent committee meetings on that topic. And on February the 1st, in the committee chair report, we can potentially notify the board that staff-led MOU document updates can be shared for review in time for the subsequent board meeting. And then in our next committee meeting on February 7th, we can discuss any feedback committee members have on these document updates. These will be shared at least a week ahead. These are the ones that are currently undergoing, not the new topics that would be kind of added or considered, right? And then staff will also be aiming to share a brief summary on the RTA information gathering exercise, provided that we're get them scheduled in time. On the that's for February 7th, and then subsequently on February 15th at the board, we can actually I had written that we can propose a committee approach to meeting with the RTAs, but I think that kind of we formed the consensus that that will just be taking place during the MOU committee meetings. So let me skip that portion. And then by February the 21st, staff should have revisions made on the staff-led document updates based on any feedback that was provided. And then on a separate topic, staff can also begin gathering input on topics for board education, training, and peer exchange to get that portion rolling as well. And I want to pause actually, because I And I'll pass it back to Tom because I see hands raised as well. So let
Okay.
me pause.
All right, thanks, Dave. Brian.
Thanks, Tom. Just a request, maybe at the next meeting, can we also just get the high level review of what an MOU is and what it does and what it doesn't do, and so that we're all grounded on the same page, because I think some of us have been around for a few of these, but not everybody has.
Sure, I think staff should be able to provide that. And John.
Tom, just looking at the schedule, might it make more sense to have the RTAs on February 21st? And be able to have heard what, see the staff summary on the 7th and do the staff-led MOUs. If we're doing all that on the 7th, I don't know, we're gonna have time. We consider almost a whole meeting for the RTAs by themselves.
Yeah, John, and I think also that also depends on when the RTAs can actually, see when they could actually meet with us, but also with staff. So, yeah, we may need to push that back to the later date. Dave, do you agree?
Oh, sorry if I wasn't clear. Yeah, that was actually the plan. So the where we kind of prime up and meet and do some initial information gathering, we can bring that back on the 7th to the committee, provided that it's scheduled by then, and then we can go from there in terms of either having it on February the 21st or the subsequent, so that is kind of in sequence that way.
Okay.
So agreed.
Right, great, thank you. Any other questions on this? Okay, seeing none, you can continue, Dave.
Thank you. And just to recap Brian's request around just a high level review on what the MOU does not, and what a MOU is, what it's not, and what it does. I'll have that as well. Discussion topic in terms of municipal engagement. So if we go to the next slide, we've internally met with the communication engagement team on staff, and this is the initial proposal. And I also want to spotlight, I guess, what Len had said, raised earlier. So it's to propose to inform municipalities by email that the Boston Region MPO is undergoing an update of its memorandum, its MOU this year, and also to inform them that there will be a public comment period in the month of November, and that interested parties can also, in the interim, reach out to MPO staff, attend board or committee meetings, and find meeting materials and minutes posted on the MPO website. With kind of what Len raised earlier, if we want to do sort of a solicitation for what the gaps are from the subregions, and then to bake that into the work, probably need to sequence that fairly quickly and figure out a medium to, in terms of the logistics of kind of sending that out. But just kind of floating that back up there in addition to kind of what we have here on the slide. And I want to pass it back to Tom to open up for discussions and thoughts on engagement methods. So Tom, back to you.
All right, thanks, Dave. Len.
Actually, Tom, let's see what you're going to say, and then maybe I'll say something after that.
No, on my end, I did talk to staff about this, and I think it's important that we get information, from basically the whole region, as to let them know what we're doing and inform them, about public comments, and so that's where I was on this. Really don't have much more to add on it. But so go ahead, Len.
Yeah. So I just want to encourage us to be, more proactive. So I think this is adequate, but but if we don't hear responses from people, to go out and solicit responses. And I am willing to have the advisory council be a part of this. Be happy to vote in advisory council meetings. To get input from people on the gaps. Just having us complement the work that is done here in any way that the group feels is helpful. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, great thought, Len. Thank you. And David, on as far as informing the municipalities, when were you planning on sending that out?
Yeah, good question. Don't have that on the timeline just yet. Another part is our list of municipal contacts is probably not quite complete as of yet. So we will review the list of contacts we have and potentially reach out. Might need a little bit of help from the sub-regional board representatives in terms of filling those gaps in the municipal contacts. But we would probably need to circle back on the exact time of notice with kind of the completeness. Want to obviously reach out kind of equally. So I know that's an incomplete answer, Tom, but that's kind of where we stand right now.
Yeah, I think, the sooner the better on that, so that, they feel like they're part of the process, and that it would be interesting as, I don't necessarily want to wait until November to get public comments. As we're going through the process, maybe we could, keep in contact with the municipalities and keep them updated as to our progress, and then that might generate, more questions from them that we can have in kind of real time. Brian?
Just going to offer my assistance. I have updated lists of every town manager, select board chair for towns
great.
and mayors as of January 1st. If you're going to contact towns, don't do it in April or May when they have elections and town meetings, or in November when they have special town meetings. And if you're going to contact cities, don't do it in November when they have elections. So I would suggest March or early June, September, October at the latest.
Yeah, it'd have to be early June. I know budget start. I know in Somerville, at least, the budget season starts in June. So
yeah, there's a real sweet spot where you got to get it in. And in terms of who you're contacting in towns, it's one thing to say you're contacting municipalities. It's another to figure out who you're contacting. So Dave, give me a call. We can figure this out together.
Great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. All right. Anybody else on this? Seeing none. I think we're going to members' items. Any members have any items that they want to bring up that they haven't already? Or any regional concerns or local community issues? Okay, seeing none, next meetings.
Next meetings will be scheduled for February the 7th and 21st in the afternoons on Wednesdays, 1:30 to 3. And then if we go to, and please save these within your calendars, and in the next slide for your reference have included both an overlay of the MOU committee meeting dates that are proposed, as well as the MPO board meeting dates, and this will be shared on the website for reference. Two things actually to briefly visit here is the month of July, and I believe at the very least the month of July. There was one initially on the 3rd that we had but given the 4th of July and possible vacations, we wanted to shift that over to July the 17th. So that'll be a bit of a deviation from kind of the first week, the first Wednesday of each month. And I think that is all. in terms of deviations from kind of like having kind of a routine set up. And so, yes, that's it in terms of scheduling and next meetings. Back to you, Tom.
All right, great. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or issues with the scheduling? Jen?
Thank you. Apologies for missing this. I just wanted to confirm that the second meeting in February was also the 1 to 3. Okay, cool. Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Anybody else? Not seeing any. With that, I would ask for a motion to adjourn. And I'd like to thank everyone. It's a great conversation today.
Eric Barras, I'll make a motion to adjourn, and I agree. Great meeting. Thanks, everybody.
And I need a second. Jen?
I will second that motion. Thank you.
All in favor? Do we need a roll call on that? Nope. All in favor? Aye.
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 All right. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks,
Everyone.
Tom.